Thank you so much. It's fabulous to be here. Have you all had a really good time today so far? Like 4 people have had a really good time, yeah? You've all had a really good time today, yes? Perfect. So my name's Nick Badminton. I'm a Brit, but I'm also Canadian. I actually live in Toronto now. I've been living in Canada for 17 years. And I'm a futurist. I help clients look out 10, 20, 30 plus years so they can anticipate what comes next, create a level of vigilance, and to try and understand what they need to do today to get ahead of the competition and to think differently about the world that we live in. When I think about futures, it's never a singular future that we're all heading towards. There's a plurality, there's infinite futures ahead of us. And that's a really interesting thing to think about when you're doing your job. Because really what you're trying to do on a per-person basis is trying to give the right message to the right person at the right time. Now, this lingo is not new to me. I actually grew up in a small village in the southwest of England, and I went to university, I graduated, and I specialized in marketing technology from the year 2000 forward. So I was really early in the game. I used to run those big teams of SaaS developers, struggling with data and doing targeting and segmentation, whatever. So I've got a lot of understanding and empathy for what you do and how tricky it can be. But it also gives me a good foundational basis of understanding where we need to go. And this keynote is really built specifically for you to think a little bit differently and to think about your strategic sort of priorities as you step forward into the wide new world that's sort of headed towards us. Now, I said I grew up in a small village in the southwest of England called Martock in Somerset. I'm pretty sure someone at drinks afterwards is going to say, I grew up there, or my grandparents grew up there. It's kind of one of those places. But my father, when I was 8 years old, gave me this book. It's the Osborne Book of the Future. Now, this book was released in the late 70s and had these wondrous visions around the world that we were going to live in. We were going to be traveling to the moon, there was going to be flying cars, there was going to be the Hyperloop, we were going to be living under the ocean, we were going to have smart homes and smart watches, and only a very small part of that book was correct. I'm wearing a smartwatch today. But what the book really showed me was that there was a real excitement around what technology could bring to humanity and how we could live. We could suspend belief and really start to look to the stars at what comes next. And at that point, I kind of became a futurist. Now, through university, I studied AI. As I said, I did marketing technology, and it sort of brings me to today as a futurist where, we're surrounded by a lot of noise. We're surrounded by a lot of promises around what things can and can't do, how the world will absolutely change and whatever. And everything is speculative to me. I don't actually predict a single thing. But what I like to do is I like to cut through that hype. I like to focus on hope. Now, hope kind of seems to be a fanciful word, but really modern hope theory tells us that if we set really meaningful goals and pathways towards them and give agency to the people that we work with, that we can create a better world. In fact, I think hope is an energy. It's an energy for change, not only in the future, but actually back to today and us making a change as the teams that really change and shape the world. And there's a lot of challenges that we see in the world, and those challenges are the things that we focus on. So shifting from hype to hope is incredibly important as we sort of frame the futures that are ahead of us. And there's 4 things that we do as futurists. So start to think about this as you're sort of going out into the wider world after this keynote. And I'm going to be at drinks tonight, so come and grill me about this as well. The first thing we do is we scan for signals of change. Now, a signal can be a new kind of technology. It could be a capability in an organization. It could be a societal shift, a cultural shift. It could be a pandemic. It could be a war, could be a change in business administration, could be a change in political administration as well. But there are tens of thousands of these signals in the world. And we gather those signals and we bring them together. And when we start to combine them, we head into stage 2. And the second stage is about looking for emerging trends. Now, emerging trends, as we know, are incredibly important as we start to forecast and see where we're going. Positive changes in the future, challenging times, maybe even sort of a mundane trajectory ahead where we just get better, like piece by piece on a daily basis. But the third piece is where the rubber really hits the road with futures work, and that's scenarios. So what if in 2042 we see these systems, these places, these things, these technologies, the dynamics between them have these positive and challenging effects? And we can start to see how these dynamics start to play out. And some of the things that indicate to us that strategically we need to pay attention to the things that are likely to happen ahead of time. And the fourth piece, and I'll sort of wrap up the keynote by bringing us back to it, is around storytelling. Now, we're in the business of storytelling, and why? Because once you can tell a good story about a future or a story about our company, they can feel what we believe in, they can feel what that future is like. That feeling creates impact, and having a depth of understanding and empathy really creates an impact for what we want to do in the world. So signals, trends, scenarios, and stories. But I'm actually going to take the idea of the positionless marketer, and the idea of positionless actually, really comes from a long time ago, where we start to think about the people that invented the world in which we exist and we thrive in, the people that invented the tools that we use. Now, quick show of hands. Hands up who knows who Douglas Engelbart is. So I've presented to tens of thousands of people this story of Douglas Engelbart and his team at Stanford. No one knows who he is, but I'll tell you who he is. Douglas Engelbart, in the 1960s, raised some money, and he wanted to build a center for human augmentation. He believed that the military-industrial complex of computing could actually be relevant for everyone in the world. Back then, there were very few computers in the world. They were the size of a quarter of this room, and they needed several people to operate them, and they were very difficult to implement, and they didn't really have any sort of business value per se. But Douglas Engelbart and his team, by 1968, gave a demonstration in downtown San Francisco. And the demonstration was known as the mother of all demos, and here's some clips from that. It's about an hour-and-a-half demonstration. His team invented the mouse, the touchpad, desktop publishing, hypertext linking, early versions of connected computing, and the internet with ARPA. They invented wireless modems so they could transfer data from Stanford, 30 miles away, to downtown San Francisco. They invented video conferencing. So this was the team that saved everyone's behind during the pandemic, right? And what was really interesting was they gave this demonstration of what they called the online system, or the NLS, very catchy, about all these technologies playing together. And this was the inception of the idea that there was personal computing that could come into our world. Now, you can go to YouTube and watch the entire demonstration. He's a very charismatic guy, Douglas Engelbart. And the demonstration really takes you through. And it's a masterclass in showing us what technology can mean to us in this world. And this center of human augmented capability kind of ticked along and didn't really do much. But there were some people in the audience that were blown away. About 1,000 people stood up. They applauded. They went home. Some people took some of those ideas one stage further. Following that, there was a team at Xerox PARC, and you've probably heard of Xerox, the people that do the copiers and the printers and the such like. And at Palo Alto Research Center, or PARC, they came together and they created something called the Xerox Alto. And this was really the world's first commercial personal computer. And obviously, they evolved the mouse. They evolved graphic user interfaces and object-oriented programming. It was an amazing piece of kit. And the Xerox board of directors were happy to fund this kind of research and many other projects. But they didn't see this as being a future for the company of Xerox. What was their future? Better copiers. The future is better copiers. That's what we sell today. That's how we make our money. We're incredibly successful. We're number one in the category. More copiers, right? Now, what was really interesting about this was they were doing hundreds of demonstrations every single year to people to try and build interest, and still the board of directors and the executive weren't really thinking that this was going to be anything impactful. In fact, if you were going to try and buy an Alto, it was about $140,000 in today's money. About $32,000 back then. No one was going to buy it. It had limited applications, but it was a promising demonstration. Then one day, the team gave a demonstration to a group of developers from a young software company in Silicon Valley. And that team was blown away. And they were like, we need to get our founder in here to take a look at this, because this is significant. And they went to their founder, and the founder was deeply unimpressed. But over time, they convinced him, you've got to come in, you've got to come and take a look. And this is who it was. And this is what he said.
It was the best thing I'd ever seen in my life. Now, remember, it was very flawed. What we saw was incomplete. They'd done a bunch of things wrong. But we didn't know that at the time. And still, though, they had the germ of the idea was there, and they'd done it very well. And within, 10 minutes, it was obvious to me that all computers would work like this. So.
Pretty amazing when you think that Steve Jobs really saw this opportunity and saw potential. And it's because he had started seeing the opportunity to have personal computing in the world, to have a software stack that supported a number of business and creative functions. And he started to build these ideas of trends and even use cases that were scenarios going forward. So what he did was he cut a whole bunch of shares to the board of directors over at Xerox. And he said, can I use this technology? They're like, sure, we're not going to use it. Personal computing, who's going to really care about that, right? Then over the next few years, he evolved this technology to the next stage. And by 1984, they produced something that was mind-blowing. So this is really interesting in terms of Steve Jobs as a futurist. So he looked at the signals and what was being developed. He looked at the trends of how this could change the world. He looked at the dynamics in terms of use cases. But then he had to tell a story. So in early 1984, he went to see Ridley Scott that had just done Blade Runner in 1982. In 1984, he explained to him, alongside his advertising agency, Chiat Day, with Lee Clow, that they needed to tell a story and they needed to do a Super Bowl ad, and they kept it secret from their board of directors because they had a big, wild idea. And the ad that they put together is probably something that you know about today and you've probably seen before, but let's take a look at it again.
Today we celebrate the first glorious anniversary of the information purification directives. First time in all history, a garden of pure ideology, where each worker may bloom, secure from the pests, obeying contradictory thoughts. Information, of course, is more powerful a weapon than any fleet or army on earth. We are one people. One resolve, one cause. Our enemies shall talk themselves to death, and we will bury them with their own confusion. We shall prevail.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
So the Super Bowl that year was a fairly dull game. This ad was incredibly exciting, but it wasn't exciting in any way, shape, or form to the board of directors of Apple. Why? It didn't show the computer. But what did it do? It told us a story of the small person, the creative small person against the man, to smash the system, to be creative and break it down. There's a subtext here against Apple versus IBM as well, but we'll get into that later on. But what happened? So today's market cap of Xerox is about $1 billion, and today's market cap of Apple is what? $3 trillion or thereabouts? It takes a long time to get to the future that we can imagine, but ultimately, if we follow through the signals and the trends, we start to explore dynamics and stories, and we really stick to the plan, we can get there and it can pay off in dividends. In fact, it's been found that companies that ignite imaginations, that build anticipation and deepen empathy, they've got a higher level of vigilance of what comes next, and they're more profitable, they've got higher market capitalization, and they're twice as fast growing than the competition that does not do this work. So futures work is incredibly powerful from a strategic planning perspective, and we're going to sort of start to break that down. But one thing that I really want to leave you with more than anything else is the idea that we can ask what if about any situation, any scenario, and any kind of determinant that we need to have in our organization, because it's immutable. Oh, we've always done it this way. I don't believe it, but what if? Let's play with the idea that we could be disrupted, our industry could be disrupted, our country could be disrupted in various ways. Let's play with those ideas. It's all about curiosity, futures work. Okay, so we're going to get into the meat of the bones. We're going to look at trend areas, and we're going to look at the signals within them. And I'm contractually obliged these days to talk about AI. So we're going to touch on that first. So the algorithmic evolution of our society. Now, we've heard a lot about AI and capabilities today. But what's going to happen over the next 25 years is we're going to have 1,000 times more data created every single year than we do have created today. So 50,000 zettabytes of data is going to be created. That means that we're going to need more machine learning to find the patterns. We're going to be able to process things in ways that are new and different. We're going to have to really invest in that kind of capability. And why? Because we have to really go through the challenge that we face today, which is the processing of data to become something valuable. Now, we all know that the gathering of data and the production of information is painless if you've got the right tools and the right capability, but it's definitely painful when you rely on spreadsheets. Hands up who loves spreadsheets. A nice bit of admission. There's someone at the back that's really excited about spreadsheets. Okay. But when we go from data to information, we wrap a narrative around it, it becomes knowledge. But I ultimately think that we're in a wisdom economy. And this conferences, when I go there, it's like the wisdom economy. You're sharing stories about what works, what doesn't, what you do, how you do it, and you share that. That's an accelerant for evaluation and research, optimization, observation, and feedback as well. And when we think about AI systems, we think about the sensors that gather data or the data collection mechanisms and how that's applied in the real world. I think one of the better examples of that is the full self-driving capability of a Tesla. Ensuring that it can drive through the streets whilst gathering terabytes of data and applying it in the real world, hopefully to not hit other cars, hit people on bikes, or run over children. It's not quite perfect by today's standard, but in a real-time sense, it's working in the way that we expect AI to work, and it's a really good pinnacle of that capability. On the flip side, AI can be used for robotics. And robotics is a really hot topic right now, and humanoid robotics is coming to bear. This is a company I know out of Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, called Sanctuary AI, and it's teaching robots how to do simplified tasks. Now, something called Moravec's paradox, and it says that it's actually really easy to replicate cognitive tasks in software. And it's very, very difficult to replicate, motor actions at the same time. So robotics hard, software and AI optimization is easier in that context. But when we look at this, we can kind of see that people are smart at getting over some of these barriers. How do they train these robots? They don't just point it as a problem. They've actually got humans in the other room, wearing robot suits, looking through cameras, through the eyes of the robot, to teach it how to do things from a motor perspective. So humans and the machine, and it's always going to be this way. The idea of mass automation for hundreds of millions of jobs is kind of a bit of a false narrative to me. It's a little bit too much hype. We kind of have to realize that jobs, yes, they're going to change. Tasks are going to change. Are we suddenly going to see massive unemployment around the world? Well, it's going to shift, it's going to change. And then that brings us on to the exciting world of generative AI and how that's affecting things. And, we see lots of tools out there, standalone, that do everything around text and imagery, video, audio. I've got friends that do some absolutely amazing things that entire teams of marketers would want to do from a creative execution perspective. But what's happening is it's becoming native. It's going into platforms. It's being useful in the places that we're already inhabiting from a data perspective. So that's where it's going to be really useful. But there's sort of a warning sticker on the package of generative AI. Whilst we can see a huge amount of productivity, and there's a study from Boston Consulting Group that said, we gave 1,000 of our consultants generative AI, GPT, and we found that they could do more, higher quality, and more throughput. And that was great. There's another study that sort of reflected off of that as well and said, but there's less critical thinking, there's less quality. In fact, there's less diversity of thinking. So you're getting more low-quality output, which is really worrying to me as well, because what do we need today? We need high-quality output. We need consideration, critical thinking. We need to execute. Again, human and the machine. Right? I think that the AI is a 20% sort of addition to our capability, and a lot of people think that that's underplaying it. But it can get you out of a point where you're struggling for starting to write a plan or to write a blog post or to break some deadlock in some thinking that you have. It will just act as an accelerant, and it will augment your human capability. Remember Douglas Engelbart back in the late 60s, Center for Human Augmentation? We're kind of still on that trajectory, right? Human and the machine. But we have to be also really careful, because sometimes when we rely on technology that seems like magic, that is amazing to us, that does shape how we do the work that we do, we can become a little complacent, or we can rely on it, or we can just say, okay, we can just go into automated mode and that's going to be good enough for our business. So to illustrate a point around this, I like to tell a quick story. There's an art activist out of Berlin called Simon Verkart, and he did something called Google Maps hack. On a Wednesday afternoon, about 5 years ago, he took a small red wagon and he put 99 smartphones in it. They're all connected to the local mobile network. And he turned on Google Maps in each of them. And he started off on one side of the Spree in Berlin, and he walked slowly across the bridge and into the streets on the other side. Over the period of about an hour, he managed to empty the streets where he was in a particularly busy part of Berlin, as it was usually at that time of the day. And he caused massive traffic jams across Berlin. Why? Because everyone had outsourced their capability about wayfinding around Berlin to their smartphone and to Google Maps. Hands up who relies on Google Maps or Waze or something like that to get around. Hands up who's ever regretted ignoring it, right? So what we've got is this dilemma of like, how much do we trust it? And if we don't trust it, what trouble are we going to be in? So a constant check-in on what is real and whatever. When I drive through Toronto and I don't believe what Google Maps is saying and my wife is in the car, there's a real problem. Hands up who's had that problem. No. So there's something interesting here, human and the machine and its capabilities and all this great stuff, yes, but we have to be super considerate about how that is acting. And today, like, AI is kind of as bad as it's ever going to be, and it's getting better. But as Jan LeCun from Meta says, before we can get to godlike AI, we need to get through dog-like AI. But dogs are pretty smart, and they can certainly help us. So bear that in mind as well. And it's also useful to know that AI isn't a strategy, it's a tool in the stack, right? But the people that love spreadsheets today, and I'm sorry, my friend at the back, are probably not going to be using spreadsheets in the next 10 years. Because the streamlined nature of the gathering of data and the production of information is going to be automated to the point where we can focus our attention on the knowledge and wisdom side of things. That means more strategic work, smarter employees, better decisions organization-wide. And the evaluation, research, observation, and feedback and optimization that we can achieve will be exponential. But we just have to be really careful about how we do it. And then, and the hot topic of this year is agentic AI. And there's still some challenges here. Yes, we can create these fully autonomous agents that can all potentially work together. You can give them the history, you can give them the tools, and you can send them off on missions to go and do some things, and they can iterate. They can make tons of mistakes and they can get things wrong, but there's a lot of people doing experimentation. Now, there's some researchers out there that have said, okay, we're going to plug this in, we can create a virtual world, we're going to see how agentic AI starts to work together. Let's take a look what they found.
This is a Minecraft server, but every player here is actually an autonomous AI agent. And they're completely Minecraft agnostic, capable of using other apps and games. Our agents started with nothing and then worked together to collect over 300 items in Minecraft. They set up a market where agents agreed to use gems as a common currency for trading supplies, building an economy. In this case, you might think the merchants would trade the most, but it was actually the priest. Why? He was bribing townsfolk to convert. We run these worlds every day, and they're always different.
And it's interesting. If you think about it, the big promise of agentic AI is you can set it, forget it, let it go and do its thing. Wow, we've got a better world. The bottom line is we can't. We have to still interact. We have to work out what that hybrid model of using it and not using it is. But we're going to see more talk about agentic AI over the next couple of years for sure. What if we augment our intelligence and master data-driven execution? It's still about the mastery of data, right? And then it brings us to the world that we live in. And where we are, we're hyper-connected. I'm pretty sure everyone in the room's got a smartphone in their pocket and they're connected to multiple systems and there's multiple personas out online that people are interacting with and you don't know what's happening right now. But this sort of comes from a beginning of data. We saw Douglas Engelbart, right, on the top left. Around about the same time, the whole discipline of virtual reality came about. This is the Sword of Damocles. It was a project in the US Air Force. Around 1967, 68, they were experimenting with what virtual worlds could look like. Then down the bottom left-hand corner, MIT's Media Lab, Nicholas Negroponte, that was running the MIT Media Lab, called these guys the lunatic fringe. These guys invented wearable computing. In fact, one of the guys in there at the back is Steve Mann. He's a professor from Toronto. Literally invented most of the parts of wearable computing, early versions and early concepts around HDR, Google Glass and the such like. He's absolutely bonkers and I love him. And the world's first Internet of Things machine was actually at Carnegie Mellon in 1983, and it was a Coke machine. And all of this is kind of shaping our world. And it's just a reminder that it takes decades for a piece of technology that kind of seems cool today to have a purpose and for it to become something that's more relevant in the world. But then, in 1992, 1993, we saw the internet, right? Anyone get on the internet in 1993? I'm really old. I was at Bournemouth University. I joined the Internet Club, and the first version of the internet I used was dialing up through Sun Microsystems green screens to a university in Oslo. It was that exciting, right? But then within just a few years, you saw MySpace and GeoCities, some of the earliest networks, e-commerce from eBay. People like Douglas Rushkoff, who's an amazing author, you should go and read all of his books, was exploring what like cybernetic and Siberia-like culture was like in the digital trenches of hyperspace. And then we sort of hopped into the world of social media. And we probably know what this is. This is Facebook's, this is almost like your life map, right? If you're married, this is what a marriage feels like. You like that person, you love that person, you're having the best time and you're laughing. Wow, what did you say? I'm really mad, angry, and then you get divorced. Not always, okay? Maybe the first time. But what's interesting is that this is a representation of the behavioral modification of our emotions within an internet encapsulated area. We've got a huge responsibility to interact with people with the content and the information we give. We want to have people in the love to ha-ha to like phase all the time, right? And that's what we work towards. Apparently, if you look at the research, it's not the most profitable, but for us, it should be. And the world is getting weirder. You know, three-dimensional billboards. If you've ever been to Las Vegas and you've seen the Sphere, a huge dome that can be like branded to whatever you want it to be for only $650,000 a day. A weird reality. The people were talking about the Metaverse 2 or 3 years ago, right? But the real world is a lot weirder than that metaversal idea of what the world could be. Drone displays are replacing firework displays. Why? Because you can build marketing in the sky. Right. This is from Beijing a few years ago, and we're starting to see a lot more execution of marketing campaigns using this kind of technology. You're also seeing entire cruises becoming these playgrounds, these experience centers. You've got Pokémon Go that turns the entire world into a game. You've got Pokémon even having a sleep checker app so you can catch Pokémon whilst you go to sleep. Engagement is really pushing boundaries into whole new, kind of strange realms, and I'm here for it. What's interesting about this is that this is about experience and really connecting on a much deeper level with the consumer. It's about content, but it's about participation, it's about immersion, and that's why we have to talk about gaming. Now, 2 or 3 years ago, when everyone was going hyped about the metaverse, I was saying it's about gaming, it's not about some digital online world that we're going to live in. Second Life and Roblox and Fortnite and esports. Esports is a $1 billion global industry. In Canada, esports competitions have replaced the highest grossing real-life sporting events as their main draw of people and money making. We know that Fortnite makes billions of dollars every year. If you've got kids, they're probably on Roblox. And if you're 50 years old like I am, you're probably still in Second Life somewhere. But it's interesting. Now, we saw virtual reality spoken about in the late 60s as well. We're kind of at the realm of augmented reality. Imagine a world full of people that are super connected to a world where we overlay data it's gamified, it's immersive, it's connected. Our messages can come at people in ways that they have never come before. And this is Project Aria, and this became a product called Project Orion for Mark Zuckerberg and the team at Meta. And Meta have really lauded this as a new kind of technology. This is the smartphone killer. Is this likely to kill the smartphone? Well, I think that this is like the moment when, in the late 1970s, the first cellular phone call was ever made from New Jersey to downtown Manhattan. I think it was around 1979. This, in 10 to 20 years' time, is going to be significant because we're going to be wearing glasses, which is a fairly normal form factor, and we're going to have an augmented level of access to data, an understanding of who you are, what you believe in, and whatever, plus also an overwhelming dirge of content. And we need to be super responsible. Now, there's a designer here in London called Keiichi Matsuda. A few years ago, became very well known for exploring what augmented reality worlds could look like. And he went down to Medellin in Colombia and he filmed this story. And the story is about 8 minutes long, and I'm not going to show you it today, I'm going to show you a glimpse. And what the story did was really show us a world of hyper-reality, a world that was more real than real, using this augmented reality headsets to be able to deliver data in whole new ways. In fact, this, and I've muted this, it's a kind of a cacophonous video that goes on. It's a story about a woman called Maria who's on her way to work and she needs to go to the supermarket for her employer. And she steps off of the bus into the street full of utility and data and information, full of marketing messages, full of creative expressions around how the world could be. It's a deeply immersive, gamified world that could potentially exist in the future. It's a speculation, right? There are patents for all of this kind of execution in the world. Now imagine if you step from the street into something like the supermarket and you can start to play a game. The more you shop, the stronger your fox gets, right? Now this kind of gamification kind of exists in our world already. We're already swiping and clicking and doing all sorts of things to gain favor somewhat. But what's interesting about hyperreality is it really takes us into a world that's slightly strange and dystopian, but shows us an opportunity to learn of what could happen if we do this wrong. But are we going to be in a place where we're going to be delivering marketing messages as one of our channels in the next sort of 10 to 15 years through this medium? Absolutely we are. In fact, we're already starting to see it today utilized by brands, right? But we're doing it with the rectangles in our pockets. Right? We've seen it, if you go to IKEA, you can hold up, that chair. What does that look like in the room? Typically, my wife tells me to never, ever buy IKEA stuff, but I kind of still love it. Right? But what's interesting is engagement through just this early version of that technology can actually increase the likelihood of making a purchase versus those that did not. A deeper immersion with a new kind of execution and a visualization of what a product can be in a world can take us one step further. Right? I'm kind of excited about that. But I'm also excited at the potentiality. Now, hyperreality wasn't real. What we had the Apple Vision Pro come out last year. It was an incredibly expensive headset, pass-through technology. You could see things in the real world that kind of promises to look like what Project Orion could be. But they've just launched this a couple of months ago, sorry. So we had Peony talking about positionless basketball. Right? Now you can see entire basketball games in real time, in your living room, in an application you can download today, and with all the subscriptions you have to have. And suddenly you've got an entire new realm of engagement, of a delivery of message, and it's within everyone's home. And they're not looking at a browser. They're just looking out into their world and consuming this content in whole new ways. This kind of blew my mind that this can be done in real time. So we're right on the cusp of this content starting to meet the technology from a hardware, software perspective and to really make this come to life, which is pretty amazing. So we end up with this new ecosystem, right? We talk about channels, we talk about engagement, but really it's the internet and mobile and e-commerce and payments and social media and video games and virtual worlds. Virtual and augmented reality. Central banking digital currencies, maybe cryptocurrencies as well. The ecosystem that we have to master because all of these things are going to be the language that the kids are going to be speaking for the next 10 to 30 years, right? This is going to be the way that we interact, spend money, have fun, and the such like. What if we anticipate immersive consumer ecosystems? With all of this tech and everything's connected, we have to be concerned about identity. We have to be concerned about security. We have to be concerned with these guys. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, Crink. These are the guys trying to break into all your systems. They want to own your consumer. Eventually, they want to own your eyeballs and your expressions. It's a dark world. But we have to really invest in cybersecurity and protection. And it's getting more and more nefarious. There's an engineering company in Hong Kong last year, and one of the chief accountants of the company was called by the chief financial officer and said, "Hey, I need to make a fairly large transaction of 100 million Hong Kong dollars. I need to do this in several chunks, and can you do that?" It sounded like the CFO. It seemed to be all legit. But that person followed protocol. He said, "Look, I need to meet you in person. We need to get signatories. I need to see these two members of your team and the such like." But he said, "Oh, we're traveling for the next 3 weeks on business. We can't stop that. We have to do this transaction. It's important for the business. You don't want to hold up this piece of work that we need to do." So they held an online conference call where they could see everyone. They went through it all for about half an hour to 45 minutes. They spoke about everything that needed to be done, and there was the CFO, the team members they needed to chat to, and that accountant went away and started to send money to the people he was told to send money to. And then he stopped after sending a bunch of the money around. None of the people that he spoke to on that conference call were real. It was all generative AI. So we're kind of in this weird, strange world where we can't even trust a phone call or a video call. We kind of have to touch and feel the person that we're doing business with as well. So you can imagine how this sort of opens up the challenges that we have in your organization. So the security of the person that you're trying to influence to purchase product or to have a deeper relationship with is as important as the security within your company. So what if we secure the relationship we have with our consumers? And that's holistic in terms of the word relationship. So, as we go through this fantastical world of technology, some of the warnings and some of the opportunities as we step forward, we really have to come back down to brass tacks around what we're talking about with the work that we do. Now, having 3 decades of experience of playing around with this kind of engagement and to draw, my experiences from advertising and futures work and all the companies I've worked with, it really comes down to journeys and the stories that we tell along the way. I love the marketunist, right? Tom Fishburne. So, guy turns up, he's like, "Oh, I see a catalog, I see a billboard, I see an ad online, I see something on the radio, I see it on TV. Oh, I buy it on my phone," and it's like, obviously we should move 100% of spending to mobile. Hands up who's got a boss like that. Everyone's too scared because they're sat next to their boss. But what's really interesting about that is we're kind of ignoring the bigger picture, the journey, right? And I always come back down, one of my clients is Disney, and they're fabulous. And we keep moving forward, opening new doors and doing new things because we're curious, and curiosity keeps leading us down new paths. And paths is the active word. Hands up who's been to Disney World or Disneyland, right? Hands up who's got Disney Plus, right? It's from Disneyland to Disney Plus and everything in between and all of the content. They worked this out in 1959. And it's amazing to me that more companies don't work out all of their channels and all of their content and all of the interdependencies and how to weave a journey and a narrative between all of them. And this is something that Disney does with a vigor. If you ever work with Disney, you're on stage. I did a keynote with Disney last year, and there were 13 people dressed as Disney characters singing and dancing to welcome me on stage. Next time, Optimove, we really need to work on that. You did a great job, though. You did a great job. You're not dressed like Cinderella, though. Okay. But it's interesting. Another brand that does this incredibly well is IKEA. In fact, when you look at their journey mapping, it's all about locating product, exploring opportunity, and dreaming about what your home can be. And if you look between the showroom and the website and the catalog and the delivery and the Facebook campaign and everything, including the kids' play area, it's about understanding it. That's really where this idea of positionless marketing and positionless insight and positionless futures is kind of interesting as it all interacts with itself. And we all know how we can get sucked into IKEA, right? You go up the elevator, you pass all the bedroom stuff, and then you walk out with a trolley full of all the cheap stuff as we walk out, right? It's exactly the same way that Louis Vuitton does a bunch of their marketing. And it does a bunch of their engagement in retail as well. A few years ago, I went to the Champs-Élysées Louis Vuitton store, and I urge you to go there. It's beautiful. And you go in and you go up the escalator, and you start off with all the expensive stuff, and you move down the building, and then eventually you walk out, and you've got the perfumes and the sunglasses, the stuff that's cheap that you'll put in your bag before you go home, right? Works exactly the same principle as IKEA. Works exactly the same principle as Disney worked out in 1959, right? Interestingly enough, with someone like Louis Vuitton, they've now got Pharrell Williams as creative director. Why? He tells stories. He creates journeys for people. It's bigger than the products that they sell. It's very, very interesting, the world that we're shifting towards. And really, to harness our capabilities in that world, you really need to think about mindset and your focus and the method under which you undertake that work. And mindset, we know what that is. It's about igniting imagination, building anticipation, and deepening an empathy for the consumer. From a focus perspective, it's about seeing what that journey needs to be and how we can create that, plugging in story and context and messaging, and having personalization. Right message, right person, right time, right location. And from a method perspective, experiment, think holistically about change. Because we can't just throw new technology against an old process, because new technology and old process is expensive old process, right? It's about rethinking everything. It's about measuring, and we know that. And it's about optimization, constant optimization. So mindset, focus, and method. And these things will be a strategic underpinning of how you need to think about the futures ahead of us and how they're going to be impactful for us today. But as I sort of wrap up in the last few minutes of this keynote, bringing us back to exploring futures, there are some things that sort of are nagging us, some doubts. Is this really what the world is going to be like? All of this is fantastic. It seems expensive. Not sure I can convince my boss that this is worth paying attention to, or if we should do futures work. Well, there's something called Amara's law, and this was invented by Roy Amara from the Institute of the Future. And he said this. He said, in the short term, we tend to overestimate the impact of technology. But more often than not, in the long term, we tend to underestimate the impact of technology. And we've seen it. Kodak invented the digital camera. Kodak's basically out of business today. Blockbuster ignored the influence of the internet and streaming and movies. Blockbuster doesn't really exist anymore today. Toyota is ignoring the importance of the electric vehicle, even though they invented the Prius, one of the world's best-selling hybrid cars. And potentially, in 20 to 30 years' time, Toyota could become insignificant as well if they don't correct course, right? We see lots of these stories. So you might think some things that I've talked about today are slightly fanciful or maybe never going to happen, but what if they do? And what if you embrace early stages of that and experiment and get that edge over your competition? What if you scan for signals, look for the emerging trends, and then play with those scenarios? What if in 2042 we see these people, these places, these things, these systems, these effects to our business? What if that changes our industry, changes the competitive landscape, and what if someone comes and takes our customer base away from us? Now, I said I'd talk about stories, and this is how we're going to wrap things up, by telling a story of some stories that I actually wrote for a client. Now, airports have got, every 10 years, they do a 20-year planning cycle. They're perfect places to do futures work, and I've worked with a number of airports around the world. I spent 11 years living in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, and YVR, the local airport, they brought me in, and I sat down in front of the CEO and president. I said, Craig, I want to write science fiction so that we can engage the passengers that are going to come through, and we're going to revolutionize how they think about your airport. And he was like, asked his team, should I sign off on this? They're like, you should sign off on this. And it was experimental, it was a PR campaign, it was about attracting people in to have conversations about the future of the airport. As part of that, I wrote 5 science fiction stories, and we produced this video.
Plans for the future of YVR are taking shape. Our 2037 master plan is a blueprint for an airport that'll continue to reflect the best of BC. Sustainable, welcoming, and diverse. YVR will be a feast for the senses, a hive of activity and interaction, a business hub for entrepreneurs, and a unique retail experience that is second to none. Help shape the future of our world-class sustainable airport by attending public meetings and sharing your input online.
So we set up 6 sessions to bring people to the airport to come and have a conversation about the future of the airport. They got wildly oversubscribed. We ended up doing about 16 different sessions in 3 different cities across the lower mainland of British Columbia. It was the most successful consumer engagement that they'd ever had. And what they had was a huge amount of information about what people wanted, but they had a lot of innovative ideas that were provided by the people that they were serving as well. And what was fascinating about this is that just last year, someone sent me a video, and the video was of this. This is the new international departures, and they literally built something that I'd written in science fiction to deepen the experience and the immersion. There's a little bit of augmented reality, which are the screens where you've got whales and you've got orcas, you've got the glassed-in island forest. Whilst it's not a vertical farm that I imagined, it's still pretty amazing, this whole experience. And to be there, this real idea that you're stepping into something different and new, and this is an airport that wins best airport in the world year after year after year after year, because they keep thinking about what the consumer wants and stepping boldly towards our futures. So, leave you with some tips. Futures work doesn't start in the future, it actually starts today. It's actually zero risk of doing futures work because it's on paper, right? But you can speculate, you can create new ideas about what you can be doing and what you should be researching and the such like by having sessions with your teams to really look at the signals and the trends and to explore scenarios. The first thing you can do is really question your own history and perspectives, because it's always been done this way. It's probably the worst piece of advice you can ever give anyone, right? Everything evolves, everything changes. Number 2, look for pockets of future in the present. Now, I've showed you some signals and some trends, and some questions to kickstart thinking around scenarios. But you'll start seeing more of this out there. The Baden-Meinhof phenomenon, you'll start seeing more of this out in the world after this keynote, I guarantee it. Number 3, be wildly creative and collaborate. You can have great ideas on your own. You can have better ideas together. And when you're in forums like this, you can have incredible ideas that change an industry, right? And finally, shift your mindset from what is to what if, and use that as a mantra for questioning what you're doing and evolving your business going forward. And again, we're in the business of igniting imagination, building anticipation, and deepening empathy as futurists. And that's what you can do every single day. And if you bring that to work, your strategy is going to level up. It's going to give you competitive advantage. Research tells us that that's true. Now, I'm going to leave you with 2 things. One is a resource. On the left-hand side, you can pull this up, and I'll share the URL after this talk, along with the slides. That's a resource that tells you how to do futures work, or to certainly start. Doing the scanning of signals, the identification of emerging trends, the questions you should be asking, and how to start thinking about scenarios. But then I want to set you a 3-day futures challenge, starting today. Pick a signal or 2 from today, and think about that in the context of your business, how you could use that or how you could use them, and what happens when they come together, and what effects are actually going to emerge, and what trends that's going to result in, and how that potentially is going to affect your industry. and then share it and have conversations about that, because that's how we actually gain pace and we gain capability, we gain advantage in an organization. My name's Nick Badminton. I'm going to be at the drinks later. Come and bombard me with questions then. Thank you so much. Cheers.